Hey guys, welcome. My name is William Hurley. I want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about open source and interoperability in the web and Microsoft. As you know, there's even been some announcements I think some of us have some commentary on that have happened at the event today. What I want to do is start off and tell you a little bit about myself and my views of interoperability, and then I want to get each of the panelists going in this direction to do the same, and Sam will kick questions back this way. At the end, we're going to have a Q&A, so please, if you want to ask a question, when we announce that we're about to do the Q&A, go ahead and stand up at the microphone and just form a line, and that'll be great. Everything's being recorded today, so your question will be rebroadcast in, I think, 15 MIX events or so, something like that. Is that what you said?
Say that again?
The event will be rebroadcast, like 15 different
Yes.
MIX events. So, ask good, serious, hard, punchy questions, and that would help us out a lot. So, I right now work for a company called BMC Software. How many of you know BMC? Like 5 of you. No, more of you than I thought. So my job is Chief Architect of Open Source Strategy, and basically I'm helping BMC to figure out how to open source systems management. So prior to that, I worked at a company called Clusters and did the first open source management system platform. So my view of interoperability isn't as much in the browser and everything, but more in the underlying framework of technologies. System management, as you know, is an electricity problem. You guys think about it twice, when you pay the bill and when it doesn't work. And it's not really the sexiest area. There's a huge need for interoperability, and there's a lot of efforts like the Open Management Consortium and things that have gotten started in that area. So I'm going to keep it short so everybody else has more than enough time. Miguel, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us your view of interoperability.
All right. I work for a Linux company. We distribute and package Linux, which is an alternative operating system. My interest has been for almost 10 years, Linux on the desktop and making it a reality on the desktop. And we're very close to pretty much have everything that people would need in there. So we consider that a success. A couple of years ago, I started a project to bring better developer tools to Linux, and it was inspired by Microsoft.NET. It's actually a re-implementation of Microsoft.NET, but in an open source way. And we started developing applications with that a few years ago. And the running joke is that Novell ships more .NET software on their operating system than Microsoft does on Vista, which is a little bit of an exaggeration, but we did ship a lot of .NET software in our Linux distribution.
Not just all my joke, I don't have anything to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, I'm Mike Schreffer, I'm from Mozilla, how you doing? I guess my view on open source and interoperability, Mozilla is really about trying to make sure that the web, the universal web, as Ray called it this morning, is a great place to build rich interactive applications, and you can get there using your choice of devices, operating systems, and products, and to make sure that you're not locked into a single vendor platform ever, anywhere. I mean, how many people here are really super excited about the kind of service they get out of their cable company, right? Okay, a few. You guys can leave. But as we all know, whenever there's a single vendor lock into anything, it can stifle competition, and people can get a little slow about how to develop things. So we're really about trying to make sure there's innovation and heat and advancement on the entire web that you can get to from any choice of system or platform. Mozilla is available not just on Mac, Windows, and Linux, but there's active ports to Amiga, BOS, OS2, and those aren't things we fund, those are things our community does because they can take the code and run with it. And even if we don't care about a particular platform, someone else can do the work. So users aren't stranded just because a particular vendor chose not to do something. So I think that's my primary view on it, is I think it's a great way to spur great innovation, great competition in the marketplace, which ultimately means better products for everyone.
My name is Andy Goodmans. I'm from Zend, and I've been working on the PHP project since 1997. My view on interoperability comes mainly from the server side. So PHP is a server-side scripting language, powers a lot of the web. And so while the keynote talked more about the client and the client side, the server side is really the center of our universe. So what we're seeing in our customer base is really the need for building service-oriented architectures, for connecting to various databases, web services, operating systems. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing over the past 2 or 3 years with a lot of the vendors is actually getting that interoperability with the various systems. PHP is completely cross-platform, and As was mentioned before, open source communities are very good at porting software, so it runs pretty much anywhere. It even runs on the mainframe and on System I's. We run on pretty much any web browser. And so that's really where the key focus is for us. And that's where, from my point of view, interoperability is the most important. Then today I'm also focusing somewhat on the client-side interoperability. So there are a lot of toolkits that are out there in Ajax. How do they interoperate? How do they talk to each other? How do they discover each other? How do they talk back to the server side? And so I think we'll probably talk a bit more about that afterwards.
My name is Rob Connery. I'm sole developer, a contractor. I'm a chief architect of Subsonic and Commerce Starter Kit, ASP.NET, open source systems. My focus on interop has basically been to try and break kind of what I call the Stepford developer mentality. So anyway, the Stepford development mentality of trying to bring the goodness of other platforms and other ideas into .NET, kind of break the mentality of .NET's always right, Microsoft's always right, kind of extending the concept out to use MySQL, use these other things. There's some great ideas out there. And what I've done with Subsonic is try and bring the sweetness of Rails and the simplicity of it into the .NET framework, and also to encourage Microsoft developers to step outside and see what's out there. And in that way, the interoperability comes more of a mindset, like, hey, we can step outside, we can do other things. So that's kind of where I've been coming from.
Let's see if I can get this, the order right here. So I'm Sam Ramsey. I'm the Director of Open Source Technology Strategy at Microsoft. You may have heard of the Open Source Software Lab at Microsoft. If you have, that's the team that I have the great privilege to lead. We do a variety of work. When I think about interoperability, where I land is in a couple different places. We're working with Miguel's company and creating a Linux interoperability lab, which will allow different systems, whether they're running Windows or Linux, to communicate with each other effectively. We also do a lot of work looking at how open source can be adopted effectively on top of the Windows platform. The release of Silverlight today, and the announcement of the DLR-based languages as under BSD style licensing are the type of work that I look to see Microsoft developing increasingly open, increasingly interoperable solutions. So when you look at what's my definition of interoperability, there was a Supreme Court justice who once famously said, "I know it when I see it," talking about a very different topic. But it's a little bit like that. I know it when I see it. When developers are not wasting their time writing a lot of glue code, that's interoperability. When people have choice and are able to move their applications from platform to platform, that's also interoperability.
So I'm going to take a quick second to ask the tech guys to knock 15 minutes off the clock and get it started for us, because we don't have a way of tracking time up here. So with
Maybe
that,
they just extended the time.
so we're going to talk for an hour and 15 minutes, just perpetually. So with that, though, you mentioned Silverlight, Sam. Miguel, did you want to talk about that a little bit and what your thoughts are on the announcement today? And
yeah, it was interesting that, I mean, we know that Microsoft couldn't build everything on day one, but Silverlight is cross-platform, but it's only cross-platform to two major platforms, Windows and the Mac. And like Mike was saying, part of what makes open source interesting is the fact that you're not really limited to which platforms you're going to deploy. Although we might say the world is a PC with x86 processors, there's all these other people using ARM processors, embedded systems, PowerPC machines, and with all sorts of operating systems in there. So to us, the position is that really having cross-platform support means to have a wide spectrum platform support for everything under the sun, really, and giving the people the chance to do that. And so it seems that Silverlight might be a great solution, for building rich applications, but at least from a pure open source standpoint, you have technologies that are completely open source, like building applications on Ajax, like Google Maps. You got everything runs on any browser that is standards compliant. Then the next step, you get applications that start using Flash. And it means that it's going to run on the majority of devices, but not on every single device, because Flash is not open source. Flash is also limited in the kinds of platforms they support. They do cover Linux, though, which is interesting. So from a purely purely selfish perspective of being supported, this is better than not having anything, right? Flashing the Intel as opposed to flashing my portable device here that doesn't run it. And then finally comes Silverlight, which is only limited to the guys that are able to afford the Mac versus TV ads on TV, right? So Silverlight seems to be for those guys, and we kind of feel left out of the equation. So my hope is, I would say that Silverlight 1 is something that when it was announced, or what we've seen of it in the last couple of CTPs, was something that was relatively easy to implement. It was basically retained graphic systems with some video encoding there, video playback. So it's not very difficult to implement, and that was. I mean, it's something that we've thought about.
So are you announcing that you're going to go make a?
I'm not announcing anything.
Silverlight open
I'm not
source
announcing anything, but I would say that. But the new Silverlight is a lot more interesting because it has a CLR. And well, we already have our CLR, our cross-platform CLR, that runs even on radios. So obviously we're tempted now. Now this challenge is a lot more interesting, and maybe we should look at implementing a WPF for mono, which so far I kind of resisted because I consider WPF to be kind of on the big side.
Right.
So you're saying now coming in 2008, monolith?
Yeah, exactly.
It's coming this decade or the next.
Well, Rob is a developer. I mean, when you saw the Silverlight stuff and you're thinking about interoperability and kind of the web and Microsoft's role and all of that, what are your thoughts on that?
I thought it was great. I mean, just to see that they're allowing a kind of a UI platform, something we can program against Mac and PC. That's great. It's wonderful. It also is insanely scary. I'm not a UI person, and I'm used to programming. But you throw something as rich as Silverlight at me and Expression Designer and so on, because I'm a sole contractor. And when it comes to design, my clients basically say whatever you think, which is scary. But as we saw Scott Guthrie kind of ham around today with that big old red box, gosh, I don't know what else I could do with it. As a concept, it's awesome, but you throw that much UI at me, I don't know, it's kind of scary. But I think it's neat, in principle.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think the most important thing about Silverlight was actually the CLR in the browser. I think the video demos well and looks good, but I don't think it's actually quite as interesting. It was pretty much inevitable that we need better, faster languages in the browser. JavaScript really wasn't cutting it anymore for real, significant applications. So I think that was inevitable, and I think it's good that it happened. It was obvious that it was going to happen at some point. My biggest concern about Silverlight is that currently it is only for the Mac and the PC, and while Ajax is maybe not exactly the most set of efficient technologies, and a lot of it is patches on patches, and the toolkits have their own issues. The nice thing about Ajax, and the reason why it's so popular, is not because the best set of technologies are out there, is because it interoperates well. It runs on pretty much any the most significant browsers out there on most of the operating systems. So. My kind of fear, and it's maybe a question back to Sam, only supporting the Mac and Windows I think is an issue. Even if I put Linux back into the mix, and it would be those top three, what the market really wants is something that runs everywhere. They want it to run on the mainframe, they want it to run on Linux on Power, and pretty much anywhere. And I think that's where open source is very good at. And if Microsoft really wants to make this very successful without, kind of the monopoly practice of the past, the best way is maybe to actually open source that piece so that the community can port it over to the various platforms. And you obviously have had, and you'll always have the edge when it comes to integration and tooling, and I think you'll be able to keep your edge, but I would like to see you actually open source the runtime.
Well, and Sam, in your role as director of open source, I mean, what are your thoughts on kind of that point, as well as what are your ideas? I mean, what's Microsoft looking at doing with all of this?
Yeah, so we don't have any plans to open source Silverlight today, and when you look at the other platforms, it's not a technology issue of whether or not we can support the platforms. It's a business issue. There are a number of platforms beyond. So when we look at desktop platforms and people's general experience with the web, the vast majority of it today is PC and Mac. When we look beyond that to other platforms, we also see Symbian, we see embedded devices, we see a range of operating systems for devices and for client experiences. So post PC and Mac, we'll be figuring out where's there a sustainable business to be able to do delivery on other platforms. But there's no religious issue. There's clearly no technology issue in getting there. The point that you made earlier, though, Andy, about open sourcing Silverlight, which again we have no plans to do, just in case anybody was confused, is as we're learning, as I keep watching Microsoft learn as we go, how do we evolve our development model to include open source development? Actually, Sean Burke here is in the audience, director in the .NET team, led the construction of the Ajax controls toolkit. So that ended up being a very popular open source project which we had on Codeplex, which led the community very, very rapidly innovate broadly over a small, tight core platform that he had a set of very senior engineers develop. So I think Silverlight will probably go through a similar process where we look at what's that core component that we think is very, very hard engineering, that we continue to work and grind on that, and then how do we open up the upper layers to be as agile as possible and to invite community innovation.
So personally with this, I mean, my one question was, where's the Linux support? And I'm very platform agnostic. I mean, I have a Mac and I have a Linux box that I use at work. But with things like Ubuntu really driving more and more into the market, you can take it, you can install it on the PC. I got this new Dell with 100 different components, and I was actually shocked at how much of the stuff just worked right off the bat. I mean, the only two things that didn't work had proprietary drivers, so you had to go and get them on your own. Yeah. But kind of shifting the conversation, Ray Ozzie today in the keynote talked about it's not software as a service, but it's software and a service. So I'd like to get the Mozilla perspective on, what are your thoughts on as you kind of mix those two, and if you do it effectively, and you can kind of hide and kind of shift the proprietary stuff from the stuff that's out on the end, if you will, back into the service side. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons the web's been so successful is because, as you said, a lot of it is open. So you see the Google mashups because you can view source on the web and see how people build things. You can call back into the server yourself and mix up Google Maps with Craigslist or whatever you want to do. And so anything that takes us away from that takes us away from the creativity people have when they spontaneously remix applications on the web. And so I think in general, the more we can get on the web that's open, both as something you can view and edit, the source code itself for the runtime is something that people can share. You said JavaScript. I wanted to take issue with, JavaScript wasn't the right language for programming big applications. Well, frankly, the demo you saw today wasn't an apples-to-apples comparison. What you saw was the CLR, which can host multiple dynamic languages, running against the JavaScript interpreter in IE, right, which is two different technology stacks. There's nothing inherent about the JavaScript language that can't be as fast as Ruby or Python or anything else. There's no, sleep loop in the middle of the language that's required by the specs.
I think the language as a language doesn't scale as well. But that's
I think there's plenty of examples where that's not the case, but I think the more important thing I think here is that we see the investment of technology on something that everyone on the web can use. So all the stuff that Microsoft has done in Silverlight is quite technically impressive and really good, but again, is limited to whatever we can get Microsoft to port it to, right? It only works in those browsers at that time, and if we have a runtime that multiple vendors can use that can work on the entire web, then we get all of the synergies of multiple developers around the world building on that and advancing the technology.
But don't you think, and that's a pretty impressive browser list. You have to give it that. I mean, don't you think the browser list that it supports, granted it doesn't run on Linux, but that's a pretty impressive list. I mean, to say you're stifling innovation.
This is a different Microsoft than 5 years ago for sure.
Yeah.
So right. So I'm always going to ask for more though. You got to expect that, right? So I think I think it's a great thing, but I think what was missing today is where's IE going, right? So what about the hundreds of millions and billions of people who run IE who don't have Silverlight? Are they going to get an upgraded version of JavaScript? Are they going to support, for example, SVG or Canvas or any of the other rich graphics applications that every other browser out there supports? Every time we add a new feature to Firefox, the number one question I get is, well, I can't support this unless IE does. So what's IE going to do, right? And that's basically hampering what people can do on the web because it's not delivering to the largest platform out there available to everyone. So I think it's both technically impressive and awesome that it's been released for Mac, for Safari, for Linux. But I think the missing picture in all of this is where are we going with the web as a platform? Where are we going on that application that anyone can access from any device, that any vendor can build a runtime for? And that's the area that I would throw the gauntlet down and say I'd love to see Microsoft pony up and really participate in.
So the browser list was impressive, right? And as a person that came out of Apple R&D and is a big Mac fan, I mean, I was very, very impressed with the demo, and it runs in Safari, and everything looked exactly the same. That was great. But one of the concerns might be that in the software and a service world, that I extend to you all of those things that you just said, but perhaps I hold back the more control points, if you will. So Google, I'll actually say is a very proprietary company, right? So they do some things with open source, but they do a ton of intellectual property work. They do a ton of putting abstraction layers between, so that as a developer you can call to stuff and you can do some different things, but in reality you don't really know what's behind the code, and they could change it at any minute, or put ads on top of it or whatever. So Sam, based on that feedback, I know you're looking for a working list out of this. I mean,
Yep.
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, what I'd like to see actually is just sort of a run through the sort of the panel here and say, where do you think we are doing a good job? Where do you think we're doing interoperability well relative to the web and open source? And then maybe come back and say, where do we really need to do more work? Obviously, because with the launch of Silverlight, that's at the top of people's minds. But just to give you an example, Andy just asked, is PHP going to be supported on the DLR? Right? When's that coming out? Mike has talked about in the past the Web Hypertext Applications Working Group, WHAT-WG. Miguel has had many conversations on interoperability. So just kind of going from left to right, going, okay, where would you like to see more of the same? Where is it going well? And then come back and go, if you had to fill up my working list for FYOA, to be super selfish, right? What would that list look like?
So one question I have, which almost everybody on the panel will hate me for throwing out, but when I look at IE, and I understand, because I run into a lot of similar situations as you, where people say, well, I can't add this feature if it's not in a Microsoft product, right? So if Microsoft doesn't support it, then I'm not going to add it, and so that's a very limiting factor. One of the things that I would like to see, and it's not a joke, is what is the potential for IE in open source? Because I'm curious as to what you would do with it and how much more improved the web experience would be for everybody. I mean, personally, using a Mac and Linux, and I run Windows and VMs, and I have Windows machines as well, what I don't like is when I go to a website and it says, you have to use IE to view this website, because to me that's kind of contradictory to what the web's about in general. So I would say that I would like top to never see that message again, where it says you have to, and that goes for Firefox too, right? In all fairness, it's not just a Microsoft complaint; it's just a general web complaint about interoperability, which is I'd like to see. I go to a website and it does look the same and it does work the same everywhere, and I hate absolutely making airline reservations, and some of them Firefox will work on, some of them it won't, or some of them Opera will work on and some of them won't, and it's not just IE that does that, but Microsoft does have an enormous platform, an enormous amount of users out there. So I would say that even if they didn't open source IE or something, pulling it into where there was a little more standards integration, so that as a user I didn't have to go and literally download IE to try to use a website. Or on the other side, from the person who built the website, it's very bad for them, because there's millions of other people who will get that message and say, well, great, that's a reason to go to Travelocity or somewhere else, because I just won't use it.
I'm gonna put you on the spot, because I hope you don't. Give me an example of A, a website, and B, a bit of functionality that won't work, that you can't do on IE, just out of curiosity, so we know what we're talking about. In other words,
that you can't.
Yeah, you said like a developer needs to, I can't have this feature because it doesn't work on IE. So what would be an example of that?
So hang on.
SVG.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, maybe we could turn it over to Mike.
There you go.
I have a long list. I don't know.
No, great.
Yeah, Mike,
I'd like to.
I tell you what, we'll skip Miguel for a second. You go, and then we'll come back to Miguel and let him chime in. But go ahead and
So
take
are
it.
we answering your original question, or are we off in that?
So I think the original question
original
really
question, what do you want to see?
is sort of where are things going? Well, let's just start with where are things going well and you'd like to see more of. Right?
Yeah, so I think
because one of the key things to be able to do is to demonstrate where to teams inside the company, because we're really talking about generalized change. If you want to see a change in behavior, you have to identify what's good already. So if we can start with that and maybe go left to right here, I think we can make some progress.
All right, I guess I'm left. I think what's going really well is the announcements today are extraordinary. They're awesome. I mean, just the UI enhancements to cross-platform Mac and PC. Things you can do with Silverlight is amazing. The fact that Ruby is now part of a dynamic CLR is outstanding for me. I think that's great. I think it'll bring some more developers into the fold. And I think that's nice. I think also the fact that Microsoft is embracing open source as a project concept is great. Subsonic is one, it's up on Coplex, and I've received lots of support from them. I think areas of improvement would be lots of support in terms of spiritual support. I just want to make that clear. I think in terms of improving, I'd like to see a little bit more open source support in terms of maybe like it'd be great to have a developer evangelist given to us. Maybe an open source MVP, something to publicly acknowledge these open source projects are of a certain quality, something like that.
I'm working on that. I have an open head count. If anybody wants that position, you should send me an email. Not a joke.
I do agree with Mike. I would like to see Silverlight work a little bit more platforms. Linux would be nice. But that's it for me.
So I was invited by a small team at Microsoft to Redmond about 5 years ago. And it was a small team that was dealing with some very specific customers that wanted to use PHP on Windows, and it didn't perform, it wasn't stable. And they called us up there to do some performance improvements and some reliability testing. When we came there, they started setting up meetings for us with the .NET team, which actually, it hadn't launched yet by that time. It was still the in development .NET team. But overall, I think the reception was kind of lukewarm. And people in the .NET team became very defensive and was very upset with that team for inviting us up. And so we got some marginal improvements from that visit, but it was very, very tactical with a very small team, and we went back home. About a year ago, we started working with Bill Hill's team on pretty much the same thing. Our customers want PHP to run well on Windows. We want to interoperate better with a SQL Server. We want to access Active Directory from PHP. And I think Microsoft, this is the good side, really has made a very big change internally. So we've worked very hard with them on making PHP perform on Windows, and it performs very well now. It's reliable. Windows Server Longhorn is going to have fast CGI support in IIS that makes PHP run well, fast and reliable on Windows. And so there really have been a lot of good things happening. I think Microsoft has finally understood that making open source work well on Windows is a good thing for Microsoft. If our customers are going to stay on Windows Server, that's better for Microsoft than if they have to move to Linux because they're choosing PHP. Another thing we're looking at is how do we make PHP work better with SQL Server? That's going to make it better for the customer. It's also better for Microsoft because they're enabling this whole community now to use their database. So I think the good side is that when it's pure interop, web services, databases, operating system, web servers, I think Microsoft is starting to get it and has put their money where their mouth is. They have invested, they have headcount in Microsoft, they're actually working on this. And I think Sam's leading a lot of this, and that's working. And so I think that's very good. I'll go back to my Silverlight comment that that's something that concerns me. One more thing, which is very general, it's not really part of the topic. I think Microsoft, has had some release issues, both with SQL Server and with Windows Vista, which is, as an organization, you haven't really managed to innovate fast enough and get those pieces out to the communities fast enough. So, for example, one of the things that we bumped into were NTFS problems and performance compared to some of the more emerging file systems that are coming up. I think you should try and adopt, from the open source community. Obviously, you have to be a bit more careful because you can't just, release like we do every 3 months. But you should try and be more agile with your releases and try and get technology out there faster. I think you're doing some of that. You're doing it with Coplex. But I think you should also start doing that on your core technology. So your core Windows platform, your core database.
So I get asked often, what does Microsoft learn from the open source community? And one person I use an example is Billy Joe Murray, who is the product unit manager for SQL Server. So after SQL took roughly 5 years to hit SQL 2005, she's really changed the release cycle. Now she's abandoned betas in favor of what we call CTPs, Community Technology Previews, every 45 days. It's a very different way to think about how do you release code to the industry. So we have very, very clearly been watching, learning. Long releases are very bad and cause a lot of suffering. On the flip side, we do have to be a little careful about what kind of technologies we uptake. So, for example, a popular request I get is, why don't you have support for pluggable file systems? I'd like to be able to run Riser 4 on Windows. Unfortunately, that project is dead in the water now, so had we done a lot of work on that and supporting that particular project because of the vagaries of how particular projects get supported and maintained, we need to be careful. So I would love to see us promote more pluggable file systems, but I think it will take a little bit of time.
Well, and I think the speed with which those releases come isn't that far off, because if you think about it, as developers, everyone in the audience and those of us that have to integrate with that stuff, the sooner we have it, the better and on time, and we can plan, and then that way the user sees that as interoperability, right? Because all of these things work together. But Mike, why don't you tell us about what you think's going right?
I think you've heard most of what I've had to say already, which is I think on the good side, so seeing Silverlight on Safari, seeing it on Firefox, seeing it on multiple platforms is awesome. Recently I've worked with Sam to get WMP11 plugin for Vista for Firefox, so that Firefox users on Vista can watch the
We serve it off of our site at the lab, and we saw 500,000 downloads in the first week of Windows Media Player 11 for Firefox, which we thought was pretty good.
So that's great stuff, and I'm seeing a lot more motion on the live side to make sure the sites work well in Firefox and not kind of degrade into old school 1999 HTML, but actually be a rich Ajax app, which is all great stuff. So I think the areas that I get concerned on are on the core web technologies, are on what is the main IE. What is the implementation of, where are they in the standards bodies, and what WG and HTML working group, ECMA working on ECMAScript version 4, which is the next revision of the JavaScript language. Where are they on SVG, the canvas tag, which is a very nice form of rich graphics on the web. All of these are the core technologies that are implemented already in most other browsers in some form, and Microsoft's the one that's kind of trailing the pack here. And as I said, it's causing adoption problems because web developers can't count on it. Because they can't, count out people who are using IE. So I think that's the big area in terms of interop, which is in those sets of applications that I don't want to have to download software for, that I can use my choice of browser and platform for. The fact that IE is not implementing them is holding back innovation on the entire web. And I think that's probably the area where there's a long list of things.
My sense is you'll probably see some of those things start to change as product teams within Microsoft exert pressure on that team. So when you look at developers for Expression Web, they're building a great product for rich web authorship. You want a consistent look and feel, consistent experience. As we have, you've noticed the live properties, obviously. We have other properties like Exchange that has web-based functionality that gets promoted into a browser. You're going to start to see more of the market forces line up internally and create shifts. But thank you for the list.
So Miguel, what are they doing right? What would you like to see more of?
Well, I think that Microsoft, and I've had this discussion before with Sam, I think that when open source started to become visible, the press immediately latched onto that and portrayed it as, well, this is the end of Microsoft, Windows is destroyed, Linux is going to take over the industry. And I think that it was obviously hype. It was obviously hype, but the immediate reaction that a lot of people in Microsoft got was a little bit of allergic reaction. And immediately they decided, well, that's the enemy. And they started treating open source and the whole movement as an enemy, but it was not more of an enemy than any other ISV, Yes, it is a big movement, but we are uncoordinated. We have 1,000 implementations for the same thing. I mean, there's a very long-standing tradition. There's even a running joke in the community. Every time somebody does a new project that replicates something is, oh, it's a new IRC client. Because at the peak of the open source desktop development, we had something like 40-something IRC clients. Everybody that would come into the development would implement a new IRC client, right? So it was like, and it keeps happening, right? Editors is another thing. I mean, it keeps happening. So we're not really, we're not a very coordinated enemy if you consider us an enemy. We're kind of, we're doing our own thing. But it is a little bit like that long tail theory, I mean, Microsoft and the Apple are going kind of, or shrink wrap software in general is going against the big guys. But once you're open source, you can take all of these big pieces and use it in environments that have never been used. And in fact, something I learned about in that conference that we talked back in August. So I think that was the background. Now, as to what they're doing right, I'm actually very surprised that Microsoft adopted the Microsoft Permissive License, the MSPL, and started releasing a lot of stuff under MSPL. So a lot of samples are under MSPL. The CSS adapters are under MSPL. IronPython is under MSPL. The dynamic language runtime stuff is under MSPL. The Ajax.NET client library is under MSPL, which has it has tons of benefits. For one, the Mono project doesn't have to re-implement any of that. So that's good news. But also it allows people to pick and choose, right? One of the strengths of open source is, well, this is kind of what I want. If I could just, it's not necessarily I want this thing, but there's these little routines are really tasty. If I can take those pieces and put them somewhere else. So MSPL has done that right, and I think that MSPL is fantastic. I wish you guys did more of that. And I understand that you probably have some kind of process by which you evaluate whether it's in the interest of the core business to open source that technology or not. I think that you're still a little bit too protective by in the things that you're protecting, because there's a lot more stuff that you could give out for free. I'm with Mike when it comes to interoperability. I think that you guys could be doing a lot more there. Participate in WhatWG. Participate in the ECMA process, because it's almost to the point of finishing up the revision for ECMA script 4, and it only needs a rubber stamp. There's no point right now in trying to change those things. It's late in the game. And I personally, I think that Mono, the project that I work on, is probably the most flamed project in the open source world. So I know Microsoft doesn't particularly like Mono, and the open source community definitely doesn't like Mono. So the only people that actually like us are the ISVs and a bunch of really cool guys. But we're not liked out there, just so you know. So for example, something that would help me tremendously, and I've tried to ask everybody at Microsoft that I can get my hands on, is to get the ECMA specs, not the whole .NET, just the ECMA specs under the Open Promise specification that you use for the XML file formats. Before you guys did OPS, it turned out that you used a different setup, which was RAND plus royalty free. But it's not the same. People now want OPS. So that would reduce my intake of volume.
That's a great working list. There are a few very good points you made there. I think one was doing more on the MSPL. So if I put this in historical terms, in 2005, I think we had one MSPL-based project. The license was written for that. It was Rob Mensching who built Wix. In 2006, I think we might have had 10 to a dozen. The current count is well over 100, and this is Microsoft internal IP, Microsoft product engineers working on projects on CodePlex, which is our Forge, and even more working on SourceForge. So it's a question of competency and practice and continue to move that forward, which is why it's so important to do these check-ins on what's working well.
Okay.
On the flip side, I think the OSP has been very successful. You could think of that as sort of the latest MSPL, right? If we introduced the MSPL in 2004, 2005, the OSP is something very, very new. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's the Open Specification Promise. It's a very short, roughly 3-paragraph legal contract which covers particular Microsoft technologies. John Rosenberg's in the room. John, raise your hand. If you have more questions about this, ask John. He's the point person for our open source licensing and shared source licensing. It's a three-paragraph contract that says basically, we promise now and forever that you can implement this specification in whole or in part for any purposes under the sun, and we promise to always leave you alone. It's as simple language as we could think of, easily readable by developers, and as we've seen that work with the 36 web services specifications we put under it, with Sender ID, with Office OpenXML. Again, this is one of those things that becomes a muscle, and we can continue to use it more and more consistently. So thank you for that.
So I kind of find myself. Did you want to?
I just wanted to add one last thing at the end.
Got one to go.
Bring it to go. Yesterday, we were having a conversation about CodePlex and how it would be nice if CodePlex offered, in addition to TFS, a subversion interface, right? Hold on, I'll get to that. Hold on.
Totally agree.
That is not my point. That is not my point.
That was just the set.
And I was thinking about this a couple of weeks ago, because it seems like the problem with Microsoft is that Microsoft is a big company that, you guys are in media, you guys are in advertising, you also apparently do operating systems these days. You have this huge thing, right? And I watched a movie about a year ago with Scarlett Johansson and Topher Grace, I think, the guy from the 70s show. I don't know if you guys saw it. It was about this young shot that comes into the company, takes over the whole editorial process, right? Because the big company bought the small publishing company, right? And he starts coming up with ideas about how to advertise other products of the big company in the magazine, right? So now the sports magazine was going to start running ads about cereal, right? And the cereals would have a little blurb from the sports magazine, right? And he called this synergy, right? And he keeps doing the entire movie. This is synergy, right? And it seems like a lot of the decisions that are happening in Microsoft are in a way related to this synergy. It's like, oh, well, we really can't do that because, this other side of the company is also competing in that space. And it feels a little bit like Codeplex could be so much better if it wasn't trying to do synergy with TFS or whatever the thing is called, and just use something like Git or Mercurial or something that developers already know how to use.
I think that's a very fair criticism.
But it's not really about Codeplex. It's about, is it worth probably stealing a little bit of Google's mantra of do no evil, do what's right regardless of whether there's synergy in the company or not, and try to leverage synergy in other ways. And I know you guys don't like Google, but
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think at the same time, my watchword is sustainability. I think what would be a disaster is if we did something one time only, right? If we took, let's just say, let's say I took some of my headcount next year and I made them all, hired key people for doing Firefox development, and I asked Mike if they could be committers, and assuming we worked out the trust thing, and that worked, and he said yes. And then the company looked at that a year from now and went, boy, what did we get out of that? Right? Is that where we want our engineers? And
I'm not asking you to commit suicide.
No, and we pull them off. It comes back to sustainability, right? We are not an open source community. We are a company, and we have to keep looking very critically back to where can we do the right thing for the long term? Where can we do the right thing and continue to do it as opposed to a one shot? So I think your criticism is good, and it has to be blended with what can we do consistently so that we build and maintain trust over time with the community and with customers. Is that fair?
I think you're getting to it, but the problem is, I was reading a blog post from somebody that attended the MVP, and there was a session with Don Box, and I'm a big Don Box fan. And I was like, oh, I'm going to read the description. And the description was really interesting, but you could see in the comments that Don Box is very defensive. He was very defensive about the company. I was thinking, Don, but the products that you're shipping are for a market where you have 99% of the market. I mean, you probably don't need to be as defensive as you are when you have that much market share. That was just my feeling. And maybe it permits Microsoft. I don't know. Maybe he's concerned about a market where Microsoft has no market share. But the way it transpired, and I don't know if it's the same way within the company, that maybe you guys are taking too seriously some angles. And for example, you might be taking too seriously not adding the Canvas support. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But
so
it's good criticism.
So, I kicked off in the opposite direction. I said one of the things I'd like to see changed. But I recently, just joined this new company, and they're like, hey, you've got to go out there and blog, and they have this heavy social media program. So I'm kind of in the same boat as Miguel, which is I have this blog, opensville.org, and I wrote this thing, 7 Reasons Why Microsoft Loves Open Source. And so all the Microsoft guys hated me for not giving them enough credit, and all the open source guys hated me for giving them any credit. But I kind of like to try to keep things very, very balanced and very perspective, because if you look at it, all of this is part of a larger ecosystem. So, there's certain ways that, some innovation creeps up from the bottom from different vendors, and, the VCs start investing in it, and it kind of goes through this natural life cycle, if you will. And so, one of the things, that I would say the number one thing Microsoft has done right, number one and number two is one, buy and Groove, hire and Ray Ozzie, right? So a lot of people are critical of Notes, but it's like the internet wasn't really around when he made that. So it was like kind of ahead of its time, and IBM kind of did the wrong stuff with it. And the second thing is, Bill Hilf is here, you're here, and it's nice to see anybody that has open source or interoperability in their title, doing things. And my third thing I would say that I didn't mention on the blog was having this panel, right? I mean, it's somewhat dangerous, if you will, to have, Mike and Miguel and Andy and everybody up here, except for Rob, because he, makes his living doing stuff. I'm just teasing. But to call out,
come on, man.
But so Rob called
You'll
me
notice
out.
he's strategically positioned between me and Dan.
Right, exactly.
So firewall, shield,
I'm bigger than y'all.
I noticed the Microsoft developer guy is like big. But on a serious note, you called me out earlier, and so I'll tell you. So Oracle Enterprise Apps. So Oracle Enterprise Apps, huge, used everywhere. If you go to half of them with any browser except Internet Explorer, it says you have to use Internet Explorer, this version, to use them, right?
It's probably IE5, right?
And Saba, yeah, right, exactly. It's like, please download IE4. But, and Saba apps too. So not just, I mean, I gave the example of things when I'm out just using the internet, but even more importantly, what about in my, everyday job, right? I mean, I come into this company and there's, Exchange, surprisingly, give credit where credit is due. I can use it with the OWA interface and whatever I want. It pretty much works the same, right? I'd like to see it have a little more of the features that you can find when you're using Internet Explorer, right? I can't search mail, I can't do the dynamic addressing, stuff like that. But really, it's really important that Microsoft, coming back to what Mike and Miguel both commented on, look at their role as a technology leader and at their market share and kind of a, I wouldn't say this, taking this new openness, super far. I mean, I understand this is a sustainability point, but I would say coming back and really looking at it and saying, okay, they're going, decisions we make affect things far outside of our scope and far outside of our daily business. And so maybe taking this fresh perspective, the new Microsoft that's kind of emerged in the last few years, and taking it a step further and saying, we know that when we make a decision with IE that, it's going to impact hundreds and thousands of developers, that now there's going to be potentially innovation stifled because people want to adopt things if it's not going to be compatible, potentially market dynamic market changes, things like that. So I think maybe expanding the thinking that's going on to a much wider viewpoint would be a really good thing.
Jim Miller
We've got about 18 minutes left, so
yeah, I'm going to open it up to questions.
I'd love to get questions from the audience because we really want to make this interactive. I think we've ended up having quite a wide range of conversations so far. Hopefully this is a good use of your time so far. But,
yeah, if you guys want to start lining up at the mic, we're going to let Miguel make his comment, and then we're going to start taking questions.
No, I was just remembering that Jim Miller from the CLR team in a panel a couple of years ago, he was contrasting scripting languages and statically typed languages. He said, well, one of them are like a pyramid, it's big construction, solid, etc. They last for thousands of years. And then the other one are like cockroaches. They're not really that, but they're everywhere and they're going to survive a nuclear attack. So I feel a little bit like that when it comes to open source. I mean, we're not very organized. We don't have a complete stack. But I think that we both have our place. Now, it's a shame that my example, we ended up like the cockroaches. But
well, go cockroaches.
I should pick a different animal next time. I didn't think that through.
So, and by the way, guys, I'm going to make one comment, but if you don't start lining up at the mic, then I have to come out as a moderator and pick on you and get you to ask questions. Mm-hmm. There we go. So, one thing, quick comment on that, and then let's get to this question, is you're right. It's kind of the Bugatti principle, right? Bugatti makes this car, it goes 250 miles an hour, and the open source guys do really well, but where they kind of fall short is they don't understand that to go from 0 to that 150 in that Bugatti takes 191 horsepower. But to go from the 150 to the top speed of 250 takes an additional 800 horsepower. And that's where companies like Microsoft could really help the open source community with this new openness and help and drive it, further up that scale. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I hope I'm considered one of the cool people from Miguel. So I hope at home I run Mono at home, and so. But anyway, my main question, like I said, I use Mono and stuff at home. I use Linux, but the company I work for, we have to produce products that almost everyone can run, and that includes Linux. And we have a lot of technical people that are our customers, and they can't even watch our videos, on Linux because we have to run on everything else. And so I want you to address as plainly as you can. I'm even trying to say, when someone mentions Linux, you say, well, it's like light bulbs. Great if we could run on light bulbs, but we don't. And so, are you going to ever support? Are you ever going to put out compiled Linux Silverlight, or is that?
So clearly, I can't answer the question because there's not a yes or no answer.
Okay.
Would love for it to be super simple. I'd love to tell you, yes, we will. Everybody in the world will be super happy who runs Linux. But it comes down to, very simply, what can we do sustainably Is there a market ready to pick it up? Is there a business there for us to run? So that's going to be something we'll look at pragmatically like we do with the rest of our products.
Okay.
So I would love to have a clear answer for you, but the business case hasn't been written.
So Miguel has
if
a
you
comment on
need
that
help
for you.
writing that, let me know.
So I wasn't as excited as WPF until today because I thought that WPF was going to have an incredibly rocky adoption process. But I think that Silverlight changes that dynamic. So I'm actually excited about doing that now. So if you want to help, we'll be setting something up.
Let me tell you, to go home and have...
look at the log of the lawyer.
I go home and I have a website, Mojo Portal works on Windows and on Linux. And it's so cool to write something, bring it up on Linux, it works exactly the same. And so let me tell you, it's beautiful, and it actually helps Microsoft, I think. Because I can write an application that, I can run it at home on Linux, I can be all geeky all I want, but guess what? My customers who have Microsoft and demand Microsoft can run my stuff too.
Well, we should hook up after. We should hook up after the panel.
Excellent question. I think you just volunteered to work with Miguel on that.
And we have the new committer for you, Miguel.
What's your question?
So I was curious about Microsoft and Mono, and one of the things I don't really understand is why in 2007, and Miguel didn't pay me to say this, why Microsoft is still hostile to Mono when they're really expanding the ecosystem of .NET, and I just still don't get why fundamentally Microsoft isn't doing more.
I wouldn't say we're hostile to Mono at all. I'd say we're at the very least neutral. So I don't know the basis for. I don't know what point.
Could you give us an example?
Well, I think Miguel actually said it up there. It said that that there's still people in the .NET team who are very hostile. He actually said that.
No, that's not actually what anybody said here. You heard Andy Goodman talk about the .NET team in PHP in 2000.
Right.
But actually, there's probably some folks from the .NET team here today who personally invited, the leadership of the .NET team, who invited Miguel personally to attend the Lang.NET Symposium in August.
Yeah.
And you can go see our interview on video from that.
So I can tell you,
I think you may be suffering from a certain historical perspective. I'm not sure where it comes from, but that's certainly not our point of view. So
I would say that my relationship with every .NET engineer that I've met has been fantastic. I mean, they're really good guys. I really have a good time when I meet them. In fact, it's funny. The first PDC I attended, I was having a blast. And then, what's his name? Oh, he was running the Rotor team at the time. I forgot his name. This is embarrassing. What was his name? No, the big bearded guy. I forgot. What? David Stutz. Yes. He says, hey, I want you to introduce someone. It's like, yeah, let's go. She's a lawyer. She's Microsoft IP lawyer for this and that. And it's like, Miguel does open source. And the woman starts yelling at me. And it's like, hey, Jesus, I didn't kill any babies here. So I think it was a matter of who you talk to. And I would say that in the past, some statements were made. But I think that today's position between Microsoft and Mono is neutral. I would like to see, personally, Microsoft be gung-ho about Mono. Yes, yes.
Microsoft's always been great about engineers talking to engineers. That's
Yeah.
more sort of position I was referring to, where I mean, maybe they're neutral, but certainly not talking about Mono a lot, not talking about how it's helping the system.
that's probably So he was wondering why we are not talking more proactively about Mono, and I would say you actually just defined very neatly for me the definition of neutral. So we're not saying we're not saying what you're looking for us to say, because that would be a positive position. We're neutral.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I don't know where to start here, but
He has a list.
you guys gave a lot
Make sure
of
the guy
great
behind you gets a chance,
conversations regarding a lot of topics. But I'd like to focus on interoperability and talk to Sam and Miguel because this drives very close to the business I am in. We are one of the, if not first or second largest financial services software developers in the nation. And, my role as an EA is to look at the strategy of the technology that we're providing. And in the financial services, I don't know if anybody is aware here, that about 95% of the, I'm talking about the user experience side, is on the Windows platform. However, there's that 5 to 10% that's always coming back. They're not asking for a Macintosh. They're, the Macintosh are for people who likes music, things that's more entertaining, right? More entertaining. But I'm looking at the new.
You should be careful here. Mike Schrepfer is a diehard.
I'm not saying anything wrong about the Microsoft
even
platform, but there's audience to these platforms. There are audience to this platform, and I'm focused on the business audience because that's the one that's putting bread and butter to my table. But what I'm looking at is, Microsoft has about 95% in terms of the user experience, the desktop side, and then about 5 to 10% is really people are coming to us and say, hey, guys, what are you doing for Ubuntu? What are you guys doing for the Linux desktop solution? Well, we can do it in Java. We can look at that solution there, but I've got investments in .NET, and I'd like to look at taking that investment and move it into, the SUSE or the Ubuntu's platforms and so forth, and says, hey, you know what? We have a solution there. Now, I look at WPF, I look at Silverlight, and hey, you know what? That's why I'm here. I'm looking at this, what's going on there, and then I'm also looking at Mono because Mono is the one that's very close to allowing us to get .NET code, CLR code, bring it over to the Unix world. But Miguel, my problem there is, as I've said, I'm dealing a lot with the user experience on the desktop. Hey, it doesn't work well. The user experience just doesn't work well. I've fooled around with Glade. I'm sure you're familiar with Glade and the UI builder because I want our developers to be productive. I want tools that works for the developers so that they can actually build this, a sophisticated application, a Silverlight. Now, I'm not really talking about the web experience here because there's definitely like a gentleman in the stripes mentioned about, PHP is broad. We've got iSeries, we've got Mainframe 2, and PHP is really a good solution for that. But I'm going to bring it back to the user experience. What are you guys going to do about that? I know Microsoft already has their game plan with Silverlight and WPF in that direction, and we're okay there. But how about the Mono side? How about for the Linux people? I mean, what can you do? What are your thoughts on that? And
I think that you have to think of this in short-term plans and long-term plans. If you need to have support for Linux in the short term, and it has to be a web-based application, I think that you can go with ASP.NET, Ajax, PHP,
right.
or one of the...
I'm not talking about, as I've said, I'm not talking about the web side.
Oh, you mean the client side?
I'm talking about the client side, and here's really what's driving this.
Okay.
User experience from our research, okay? In terms of, I'm just talking to a particular set of industry, which is the financial services, the banking, the credit unions, and so forth. It's just, buyers of technology.
But do you want the tools or the runtime?
I'm talking about the tools for us to be able to build a solution and the runtime.
Why not build it on Microsoft and then just,
It doesn't work that easy because I can show you, we've actually worked with Bank Australia who actually...
All right, I'll make it short. I'll make it very short. So,
what I'm trying to get at here is that
I think we get what you're trying to get at. So why don't we stop?
Well, one of the things I want to say, Ram,
so you're asking him
is the direction of the customers these days. Yeah, the web is there for them. They like it for home banking, for those matters. But for internal purposes, for applications, the world, they're turning back to putting things in the desktop.
Well, those things are kind of cyclical. I mean, Miguel, why don't you go ahead and make your
the quick
comment,
answer. We're working on GTK Sharp Designer. I think it's looking very nice. You're not going to have to deal with Glade, which we agree. It's a piece of suboptimal software.
I can't even do much with Mono develop,
I'll walk you through it. Our goal is to get there. We're just not as efficient, or we don't have as many thousand people working on it as we should. But we'll get there.
What's your question?
I have a quick comment and a question here. The focus on interoperability and with regards to the different platforms, I think is kind of interesting when you talk about web applications, because if you spend any time trying to do cross-platform development, you really find that the issue is more adherence to standards by whatever the particular party happens to be, rather than interoperability across it. I mean, we're 15 years kind of down the road, and are there any browsers out there that are passing the ACID2 test in terms of compliance? So
Actually, Firefox just passed about 2 weeks ago. Congratulations.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are other browsers out there that pass it.
So, beyond all these different things here, it's just really whether you're pursuing a path of interoperability or not, adherence to standards is, paramount. The question that I had here is a lot of the criticism, I guess this is the flip side of Microsoft's participation in the open source spaces. A lot of the criticism of late has been that when Microsoft does release these projects into the open source space, that they're actually crushing initiatives that are already out there.
Can you give a specific example?
Well, one that came up recently, most recent one I heard was Sandcastle, for example. And I'm not going to comment on the validity of any of these, but there are certain criticisms that when these things come out here, they actually kind of crush, in that case, something like NDoc.
I did hear about this. I'm not an expert on this area. We're trying to be increasingly thoughtful about this, and I think a good example is the Microsoft Class Server. Is anybody familiar with Class Server, what that might do? It's a curriculum management server. If you're familiar with the open source projects Moodle and Sakai, Class Server was very much in that same solution set. So when we open sourced Class Server, and it's now available as the SharePoint Learning Kit available on Codeplex, we actually worked directly with the Moodle community to identify ways to have this be non-destructive, for there to be adapters for Moodle to be able to run Moodle components within the SharePoint Learning Kit. We're also talking with Sakai about how can we have that same kind of interoperable arrangement there, so that we can be thoughtful about how these projects enter the world. So,
and I'll tell you, just as someone who spends all of my time trying to balance both of these worlds, right, throughout my career, that's not really a Microsoft specific problem. IBM has done the same thing, right? I mean, they'll go and acquire a glue code to kill a JBoss, and so. And even within projects, I mean, one of the previous companies I was at was Symbiot, and we tied together all of the open source system management projects that were security related, so Nmap and Nessus and Snort and things. And I'll tell you that, recently posted about this, the open source community isn't necessarily that open, right? I mean, it actually is very proprietary. So you talk about the standards and all, and those are good points. But as far as projects crushing projects, I mean, this is a systemic problem with forking, right? I mean, Miguel and I work on a project tonight, and we release it to you guys tomorrow, and then all of a sudden we get drunk at the Pussycat Doll show, and we don't like each other anymore, and then I go and make, my new named version of it, and now there's two. And so it's not just, I would hesitate to. Very understandable. I think Microsoft as a large company should take a lead in that. Okay, but I would say that's a problem that we all need to look at as a larger community. Yeah, exactly. Or you could be like Miguel and I and run the middle of the line and everybody hates you.
Open source competes internally, so, we've had these eternal flame wars.
Yeah, exactly.
GNOME and KDE is, 1997? So we've got 10 years of that.
So, this is a historical problem throughout software development in general, in my opinion. We have one more question right here.
Yeah, a lot of the discussions focused on like how Microsoft can work with outside of Microsoft open source community projects. And I'm wondering what some input, especially from people outside the open source community, but also Rob. Rob mentioned like that an open source MVP, something like that would be good to help stimulate the internal Microsoft open source projects. And I'm wondering what other things people would recommend for doing to encourage that.
Well, I think with
great question.
I think if you look at the Channel 9 stuff and everything, you look at what happened with Robert Scoble, right? I mean, what he really did was he put a face on the company in that area. So I really think and Sam asked for resumes, right? So I think really that'd be a great thing to see, like the kind of open source face that's really just outbound in community. I know Bill has his responsibilities and Sam has his, and certainly, Sam talks a lot about sustainability, and that's a really big job. So I don't see, I don't know that he has, an abundance of extra time to do that.
Let's roll through. We've got 1 minute left, so maybe 20 seconds from each panelist
Miguel?
on what we could do to implement his suggestion. What one thing could we do to make it easier to integrate?
Well, rather than doing that, I wanted to thank Microsoft for actually inviting me and everybody else on this panel to be here, because this is very unusual. Well, thank you very much for having me here. I know that it's a dissenting voice, so it was very much appreciated.
Same here.
Do you have an opinion on the question?
Yes, what he said. Well, Sam's already done a great job of trying to do outreach and just make sure that there is someone at Microsoft we can talk to about different issues. And I think kind of replicating that process out and making sure that Mozilla, just because we're a big project, doesn't get preferential treatment to other people out there, and figuring out how to distribute and scale that problem so that there's wikis and forums and other ways for less well-known projects to get in touch with someone and to share their opinion. And to do a forum like this, maybe where anyone in the world can participate, either online or on a wiki or in a forum or in an IRC chat, allowing again the broadest participation possible. But kind of continuing that.
Big yes.
Okay. So I also want to end on a positive note. I think Microsoft has really come a long way and have worked a lot with the PHP community to make PHP work well on Windows. I'm talking to others at Microsoft, just at this time now to kind of see where else they can contribute around the Microsoft Ajax libraries, better SQL Server integration. So I think in general, Microsoft is heading in the right direction, and it's good to see.
Rob?
Yeah, I think in terms of helping you out, I'm a believer that you can't just ask somebody to do something. So I've already done a bunch of the legwork. I have names for you. I have resumes for you. I have a group of people ready to go.
Rob, thank you.
Yes. So I'll talk to you after this.
Well, with that, we'll go ahead and draw to a close. I want to thank all of the panelists. I also want to thank Microsoft because, I know that at least 3 of us, probably under normal circumstances a few years ago wouldn't be here. But I also want to thank everybody for coming and attending and for asking the questions. So thanks very much, guys.